Alright, welcome back. So in this video we're going to start chapter 4. So now we're going to talk about the power of prayer. So we're going to talk about how prayer works, what it does, how to use it, kind of what to expect, and we're going to talk really about how to actually speak to God, right? So it is possible to speak to God. You don't have to be in a near-death experience or a spiritual experience where he's speaking to you verbally. And there's a reason he does that. We're going to talk about how to know God and really how to have a relationship with God. Because once you are actually able to speak to God, like I say, he speaks to everyone. We're going to talk about that later. A lot of people don't pick up on it. A lot of times that's because, at least I believe, a lot of that has to do with the ideas about God that they get from reality. That they get from society. And a lot of the ideas about God that they're preconceptions about God. So they think when he responds to them or he speaks to them, they think he's supposed to speak to them in certain ways. They have all these preconceptions, and they don't realize a lot of times they're doing this, but they have this kind of this idea of what God's supposed to be and how he's supposed to speak to them. They don't try to pursue him as he is, rather than how they want him to be. So we're going to talk about that. And when you really understand these things, I believe, right? I believe there's an objective component to God. So when you understand these things in terms of his objective nature, then you're really going to be able to communicate with God. You're going to start what I call your eternal conversation with God. And then, once you start that conversation, it never ends, right? It's just an endless back and forth. And it's wonderful. But in this video, I want to talk more about my experience with prayer, kind of how a lot of this stuff started. So I didn't really feel the need to put it on the board. I'm just going to talk about it. And I put it in the book too. But I kind of want to talk about experience that happened roughly, I think it was about 10 years ago from the time of this recording. And it really changed my life. So it really kind of put me on the path toward God. Right, so I had a spiritual experience with God that came from prayer, and since that experience, I feel like I've understood so much about God's nature, because at that time I understood the nature of prayer, right? And so then I just knew how to use prayer to communicate with God, how to ask for things, to ask for understanding, and all kinds of things. Like I said, that kind of was a little bit. There's more to it, but that was kind of the start of a lot of this stuff. How a lot of this stuff began. With his whole theory and everything, right? So in a nutshell, so I'll just get into the story a little bit. So like I said before, I grew up Catholic. My dad brought me to the Catholic Church, and didn't think much about it, right? Didn't really have any problems with it. Didn't have many objections to it, because I've always felt the presence. I felt like I've always felt the presence of God in my heart, which is true for everyone, right? Spiritual drive will help you to know God, right? I didn't mention it. I don't think I mentioned explicitly before, but yes, everyone has an inner knowing that God exists in their heart. I alluded to it with the discussion on spiritual drive, but what I really meant to say was that everyone has an inner knowing God exists. You can't get rid of it. Most people don't know why they know. They don't know how they know. They just know that they know, right? I meant to put that in the video when I talked about spiritual anomie and the way people respond to spiritual drive, right? But not to get too far off topic, I feel like I've always had this inner knowing that God exists and that Jesus Christ was King, right? King of Kings. But it was more subconscious, right? So I didn't mind being Catholic or Catholicism. But as I got older, I had the same thinking that a lot of people have, right? I feel like I wanted to know things, right? I wanted to know more. And although I believed in Jesus, I just wasn't, I felt like there was too much missing. There was too much I didn't understand, which exactly like I said, is spiritual drive, right? So one of the responses that I talked about to spiritual drive causes you to seek a relationship with God. You want to find God, right? And people respond to that drive differently because they don't know how to, it's like an itch you don't know how to scratch. And when your current religion isn't doing that, then you may feel the need to seek another religion. So that's kind of what I did. Not exactly, but that was kind of the approach I started to take. Because I was like, I believe in Jesus. Yes, I believe in God. But I'm just like, I don't feel it, right? I don't feel it when I go to church and in Catholicism and things like that. And I remember my dad was actually kind of upset with that. He felt I was on the wrong path, which was actually correct. But I actually stopped going to church. Well, I started really giving him a hard time about church because he kept wanting to bring me to church, but I was just like, I was like a teenager at the time. I just felt like, I don't know how to describe it. It felt more like I was being forced to go to church against my will. So I seen church as this oppressive sort of thing, you know what I mean? And it's like, I felt like I was, what's the word I'm looking for? I felt like my heart wasn't aligned with what I was doing, right? And that in itself didn't feel right. You know what I mean? I love Jesus, right? I love God, and I do want to find them, but I don't feel like this is the path. And if I keep doing it, right, I feel like I'm not being authentic to myself, right? It's kind of the best sort of way I could put it in terms of how I was feeling. So that was a long time ago. Then I started getting into New Age, right? So I started getting into New Age. This was years ago. And I started looking up stuff online. That's when the internet kind of first started really coming out, right? Social media, I don't think was around then. I never was really into social media anyway. But this was like the early 2000s. Just you should get a sense of how old I am. But so I started getting into New Age. I started looking up ideas, and I was like, oh, this is interesting, right? They talk about how, everyone goes to heaven and no one's judged, and how there's frequencies or vibrations and heavenly realms, and it's all about your vibration and stuff like that. I was like, oh, I kind of like that, right? It's kind of nice. And I actually started getting into astral projecting. I started trying to astral project and I don't think I got too much into my third eye, although I actually did I actually did start to use psychic abilities without even really realizing it. I wasn't trying to, I just did. It's only now that I know that I did. But I was basically using ESP to sort of sense the room around me, which was just kind of a weird meditation I was doing. But yeah, so I was getting more into New Age stuff. But whenever I would think, because they would say how, oh, Jesus was which I really hate that term, right? They would say Jesus is an ascended master and he's the same as Buddha and Krishna or whoever. And whenever in my mind, right, and I think this was God doing this, right? It could just be a part of spiritual drive. I've never tried to believe in any other entity. I've never believed in one other than Jesus. But whenever I would try to let go of Jesus as the savior, as someone who I absolutely need, like, oh, he's like everyone else, I don't have to think of him. Whenever I would think that, I would just feel this negative feeling in my heart, an extraordinarily negative feeling, which was like telling me, no, you don't do that, right? And so I would keep feeling that. And so I'm like, no, I didn't. So that was spiritual drive kicking in. Right? So I'm like, no, I can't let go of Jesus, right? So no matter what I was reading about New Age, it never felt right to let go of Jesus Christ. And this was before all those New Age to Jesus videos started coming out, right? So yeah, it was literally just that feeling that kind of saved me. I was just like, it just didn't feel right to let go of Jesus Christ, right? It was too hard. And so I'm like, it felt very negative, it felt viscerally wrong. And so I'm like, no, I got to hold on to my belief in Jesus, but I'm going to mix it with these other things, right? So I started I had this like half New Age, half Christian type of almost like personal religion or personal ideology. And, I went with that for a while. And what else? I did that for years, actually. I would probably say for years I probably wasn't really that interested in religion or spirituality. I was always interested in spirituality. But I guess I wasn't pursuing it in the same way I am now. Yeah, around that time I was actually studying crazy amounts of math and science. But there was one time, I mentioned it before, how I believe God spoke to me, right? And he wanted me to go to this church. I'm so annoyed now because it was obvious that God was speaking to me. It's obvious to me now. I kind of knew at the time too, but I just didn't accept it because I let society convince me of a lot of the nonsense that society thinks a lot of the nonsense ideas society has when it comes to God, right? Like I'll talk more about it later. You can't outsource your relationship to God. You will only know him through faith, right? And he speaks to all of us. But suffice it to say, during that time I came a little bit closer to God, and then I kind of fell back. He was calling me to go to this church, and then I just didn't. And then I fell back into, the kind of life you have, when you don't have a relationship with God, which is not fun. It doesn't feel fulfilling. But but I was still studying a lot of math at the time. And I was also trying to go to school, which I never completed college. So that's a long story. But eventually, many years later, I don't know. I just started feeling it again. I started getting back into God and focusing on God and wanting more. So I had a lot of dark experiences, negative experiences by this time. This was probably, like I said, this was roughly, I would say this began, like I said, roughly about 10 years ago from now. So when it started to occur. And I don't know exactly what triggered it, but I just started becoming more interested in God. I was just more like, I need God in my life. And so I was looking up a lot of these videos, near-death experiences. I didn't get too much into near-death experiences like I did later that I talk about in the book when I had sleep apnea. But I looked them up a little bit. There wasn't as many of them back then anyway. But I was looking up a lot of just spiritual experiences, right? So not when a person has a spiritual experience, but not, when they're about to die. And I was looking up a lot of those videos, and a lot of them would talk about Jesus and having a relationship with God, things like that. And by that time, I was more or less exposed to New Age stuff. But now this time, I'm seeing more stuff related to Christianity. And so I'm seeing all these videos where these people are talking about God. They're talking about praying to God. I saw a lot of hellish experience. No, a lot of hellish experiences. And they weren't all near-death experiences, right? It'd just be a person praying to God and they would have some dream. Those were scary. And so I'm like, does hell really exist, right? So I'm thinking about it. And because I'm actually a scientific-minded person, right, I consider the possibility it might be true, right? I owe it to myself to check this. Maybe God is warning us. So I wouldn't think like an atheist where I would say, oh no, I don't like that hell exists, therefore God can't possibly exist with the property of sending people to hell, right? Because I determined the property God has to have to exist, right? That's how an atheist would think. So a scientific-minded person would actually just take reality as it is and investigate it based on certain pieces of data. So these experiences would come up enough for me to presume that they're possibly semi-empirical or represent an objective nature of reality. So I started studying it. Taking it more seriously. And so, I forget exactly what happened after that. Let me see. Yes, I think I started off that way. Then I started coming to God anyway. Then I would see those. Then I was coming to God even more. And I remember I went for roughly a month. I just decided I wasn't going to sin anymore. So I actually entered a state of repentance. I didn't even know how important that was. We're going to talk more about it later, but that's 100% an absolute necessity for your relationship with God. I didn't know that at the time. They weren't even really saying it in the videos. I just did it. I'll talk more about that later because that's a part of spiritual drive. That's a part of what I call the hypocrite test. But suffice it to say, I just wanted God in my life, and I just felt the need to stop sinning because I knew that God was good and that should bring me closer to him somehow, right? So I decided that I was not going to do one thing I thought was wrong for a single month. Well, I didn't plan on it being a month. I just decided I wasn't going to do something wrong, and it kind of lasted about a month. And when I was doing that, the process of doing that, I felt crazy. That's actually what I was talking about that was the first time I started charging spiritual energy, for real. And because it was a new experience, my subconscious had a huge amount of volatility to it. That combined with shock charging, right? So I felt so pure and so clean. It was a wonderful feeling. But I still didn't feel like I knew God, right? So I felt closer to him. I could feel it this time. But I'm still I want to know. I want to know more. I want to know God. I want to. I want to. I'm still trying. That time, I'm still trying to figure out intellectually. So now I know God through faith and things like that. But at that time, I didn't know that, and so I'm still trying to understand God in a very clear way, objective way. And I'm like, I'm seeing all these people's experiences, and so one day, right? One day, I'm like, why am I even going through all this? God's right there. I know He's there. Never believe that there's a chance God might not exist. Like I said, I still don't know how people manage to convince themselves of that. Like I would have gone my whole life without ever thinking that once, if not for seeing other people do it. However, even though I always believed God was there, I didn't know who He was. And then I was like, why am I going through all this work of trying to calculate this and use this experience and that experience to try to figure things? I'm like, God's right there. I know He can just answer me, right? And just tell me, right? And so I'm like, but I would look at these prayers, these videos, and I noticed the way there was a commonality in the way these people would pray. They would always say that I prayed a certain way, and then something happened later that night or the next day. And I noticed there was a common sort of set of parameters in what they were describing in terms of their behavior and what they were feeling. So I'm like, okay, I picked up on it. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to pray to God like that. And so I prayed to God. I'm like, God, I just want a sign, right? I'm going through all this rigmarole to try to figure out who you are when I know you're there and you can literally just tell me, right? Like, and it would be that simple, then I know. And so I prayed to God, and I was like, I don't care what the truth is. I don't care if you are a person who sends some people to hell. I don't care if Gnosticism is maybe true and God, God might be a bad person, which He's not. But I was like, I don't care if that's true. I don't care if the truth is Jesus or Buddha or whoever. I'm like, I just don't care. All I want is to know you, God. I just want to know the truth. That's it, right? I'll take it, whatever it is, whatever the consequences are of knowing that, right? I just want to know you, God. And I accept it. Like I said, whatever you tell me, I'll accept, right? So I'm making myself very vulnerable because no matter whatever I was told I was going to go with, and I meant it. And so basically to understand what happened next, and I take this detour in the book too, to understand what happened next, you would first have to understand a little bit of experience I had back in high school. This was after high school. And a lot easier to explain than speaking than writing in a book. But when I was in high school, like I said, I was into astral projecting. So I just, for whatever reason, got really into astral projecting because I wanted to explore the spirit realm, which that's actually a form of temptation to obtain knowledge instead of truth. We're going to talk about the difference between knowledge and truth later in the chapter. But yeah, people are always tempted to know knowledge instead of truth. And knowledge, we'll get into later. I don't need to really discuss it now. But that was an example of me being tempted by knowledge, right? And so I wanted to explore the spirit realm and hopefully that would give me more truth, right? So what I was actually seeking was truth, right? The truth of God, the truth of Jesus. Well, the truth of God at that point. I believed in Jesus, but I still wasn't sure about a lot of things. So I'll just say the truth of God. And so I was trying to astral project. And what's funny is the very first day I astral projected, and I do know why now it worked, right? But I didn't understand back then. The first time I astral projected, made an effort, it worked, right? So it was kind of an amazing experience. At least I felt it begin to work, then I stopped the experience. I felt my body becoming weightless, right? That's an interesting experience. It's like you can feel how do I describe it? It's like you start to feel that your body has less density. You can feel the density of your body too. But it's like you can now feel this other body that feels like almost like air, right? It has very little density, almost no density at all. It's almost like non-corporeal, almost like what I'm trying to say, almost like liquidy or vaporous or whatever, like a type of vapor. And I could feel it sort of lifting out of my body. There's a huge amount of pressure for whatever reason. It's like it was pushing against this type of pressure that's holding it in my body, right? But it's pushing against it. And I felt this huge amount of pressure in my chest. And I felt all this electricity, right? That's what the best way I could describe it. It felt like electricity going across my body. And I could feel myself sort of lifting out of my body. So I was just holding the intention to try to lift out. I was trying to push myself out. I didn't know how to do it. That was just the way I thought to do it, was to use my intention to push myself out of my body. And it was working, right? And so I was lifting out of my body, and then I stopped the experience because I'm like, oh, I'm not ready for this. I didn't actually think it was going to work. And I remember it was so interesting. When I woke up, when I got up, I felt my third eye buzzing like crazy, and everything seemed to be like in HD. Like everything I saw, heard, sensed, everything was so much more intense, right? And I thought that was amazing. And that lasted for, I think, about 30 minutes or so. Then it went back to normal, my normal senses. And I was just super alert to everything. And that was just an amazing experience. And I was like, oh, wow. And I remember I went to my friend's house and hung out a little bit. I just wanted to think about what happened. And then I think the next day or a few days later, I'm like, okay, now I'm ready. I'm going to do it again. And this time I'm going to do it for real. And so then I tried again, and it didn't work. Right? It didn't work at all. And then I kept trying. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll do it again. It'll work like it did that first time. And then it didn't work again. And then I just kept trying for months, and it just would not work. I didn't know what it was I did that first day that made it work, but no matter how hard I tried, it did not work. I didn't even get a little bit close. Nothing happened. No, I would feel symptoms, but I would never get to that same point, and I would just give up and stop trying. And I tried like crazy, right? Because I was in high school, it wasn't working, so I just kept trying, and it just never worked. And then one day, I don't remember exactly how long later, I would imagine probably a couple months later, after maybe 100, 200 tries, it worked again. Finally, right? So it finally worked. It was at some point when I woke up like a little bit early in the morning, and then I was going back to sleep, but then I just decided to try it, and then finally it worked again. Same symptoms, right? Electricity coming across my body, feeling this crazy amount of pressure in my chest lifting up. This time, I don't remember if it happened the first time, but I felt this need to breathe. I was like I was breathing very heavy. And it felt like my breath was helping to push when I would it would be like a certain timing to it. I think I don't remember if it was exhaling or inhaling, but on one of the actions, right? So probably when I was exhaling, I would feel like I was pushing my body out. Then I would breathe, and then I would exhale, and then I can feel it pushing more. So I had to do it like on a frequency, which I don't really want to talk too much about how to astral project, because I don't want people to do that. We'll talk more about that type of stuff later. You have to do it with permission from God. You have to have a strong relationship with God if you ever do something like that, and with His blessing. You wouldn't do it without His blessing. That's just witchcraft. But, so yeah, I was doing that, and then I stopped the experience again. By that time, I didn't really care that much about actually doing it. I just kind of wanted to see if I could, so I would do it, so I could know how to do it later. So, like I said, I was always a scientific-minded person, always trying to put things into rules and figure out how stuff worked, and I was doing it with that too. And so then after that, I started trying again just to see if I could, if I had the theory right, and it never worked again, and I just gave up. Right, so I was done with that for that portion of my life, and I actually never tried again to do it. It would be easy for me to do now. So yeah, going back to my experience, right, so when I prayed to God, and I asked Him for a sign, and I put all my emotion into it. I meant every word. I told Him that I wanted to know Him, and I just wanted a sign. I don't care what He tells me, I'm going to believe anything He says, right? At that point, I just want to know Him. So later that night, I think it was later that night, right? I don't think it was actually even the next day. It was later that night. I was going to sleep. I think this was even in the afternoon. I was just like taking a nap. But I was going to sleep. And then what was amazing, right, was I started having these same symptoms of astral projecting. I could feel myself sort of starting to lift out of my body. I could feel this like electricity, same symptoms as before. The thing was, though, is I never ever had those symptoms when I wasn't trying to astral project. I only had those symptoms 2 times in my life. And those 2 times where I was about to astral project. Never had them again, and this time that was probably over 10 years ago. from that time. Because that time I think I was like 27-ish. Yeah, I might have been 27, 28, somewhere around that. And I had the experience of astral projecting when I was in high school, maybe around 17. So it was like roughly 10 years ago where I even had those experiences. I never had them before that. Before I was like those 2 times I astral projected. So I didn't have them when I was younger. And this one time I started having those experiences again, but without trying to. I was just going to sleep. And I started feeling all those same symptoms. And I had this feeling, right? I would call it inner knowing, but I had this feeling I was about to meet Jesus, right? Which was at the time, now it feels amazing because I have experiences with Jesus now. I feel his presence sometimes and it feels wonderful. But that time it was kind of scary because I was like, it's like if you're not used to it, you know what I mean? It's like, and if you're not used to it and you know you're not really living right, it could be a little scary. Right? So I called it in the book, I call it the fear of God, right? And well, a lot of people use that term, but I refer to that term in the book, right? Something that people would generally call the fear of God, right? And then I felt it, right? Because I wasn't really expecting it. I didn't know what to expect, right? But I didn't know that was going to happen. And now, when you have this feeling like you're about to meet God or Jesus, like it's like, oh wow, right? It was, for me, I just kind of really wasn't prepared for it. And I remember I kind of got up and I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue with the experience, right? And they respect your free will. But like I said, I had this inner knowing I was about to see Jesus. And so then from that day, I was like, oh, that's the sign. And that's what God does. So he gave me an experience that he knew I would understand because I've astral projected before. Well, I was in the beginning stages of exiting my body, never fully went through with it, but never had those experiences, those symptoms before. And he gave me an experience that he knew I would be able to understand was not just a coinky-dink, right? There wouldn't be any way to explain it other than saying that it was an act of God, right? So I knew he was there, right? That was the sign, exactly the sign that I had asked for, right? And it was a sign that led me to Jesus. And so, because like I said, I would have accepted whatever he told me. If he told me to believe in Buddhism, I would have done that, right? If he told me to believe in Hinduism, I would have done that. And like I said, I meant every word. And so, from that experience, he led me to Jesus. So ever since then, I understood the nature of prayer because, like I said, I had put it together from watching those experiences where people had prayed to God and had a supernatural experience. So I understood a little bit about how it works. And it worked for me, right, from that experience. And so then I just started praying to God more because I understood how it worked. I understood how God, well, I didn't fully understand how God speaks to people, but I started putting it together. And so basically that's the story, right? So I learned how prayer works from that experience, and I started really coming to God from that experience. And I remember I prayed to God, and I asked him, I told him that I wanted to know about, because I've always had that desire, right? And I think, that's part of my purpose in life. That's why the desire is in me. I've always had that desire to know the spirit realm and to know metaphysics, to know how it works. That's actually part of why I was studying all that math when I was younger. That's a longer explanation, but I've always had that desire. So I was praying to God and told him I wanted to understand spirituality. I wanted to understand the spirit realm, how it works, the metaphysics. I wanted to see it like an equation. And there's a way I worded it that I know God would have obviously known what I meant by it and what I was asking by that wording. And then the next day, I was theorizing about metaphysics, about the spirit realm, the way I always do, right? So it was nothing new. I do that all the time. But when I did it this time, right, it was like there was all these little things I was putting together so easily, so effortlessly. It was so clear to me, right? And I didn't know. I was like, how did I never see this before? How did I never put it together? But I was just like left and right. It's like I had a huge amount of inspiration. And I was just understanding all these things about spirituality and putting it together like it was nothing, right? And that's what I was saying before. I felt like I was being downloaded with information. That's really what it felt like. It was like, I don't think I'm the one fully coming up with everything because I'd never done it like that before. And everything was just coming to me so clearly and so fast that I would describe it as feeling like I was being downloaded with information. And yeah, so I learned a lot about prayer. I understood the basic print. That actually didn't. I didn't learn about a subconscious energy at that time, but I understood a good chunk about the spirit realm from that, about the nature of intention, the importance of free will. I understood certain aspects of why we need Jesus Christ. And so, even certain principles of the law of manifestation, which we're going to talk more about that in the context of subconscious energy in chapter 9 and 10. And so, from there, I just started praying to God more and learning how to pray to God. Didn't fully go to God at that point. I would say, how long was it after that? I'd probably say a little bit after. What was I doing? I'm trying to remember why I didn't fully go to God, and during that time. I know why. Yes, because I was busy with something. But later, I started trying to understand subconscious energy more, and then that's basically where I am now, right? So that's basically what I've been doing for years now. But I didn't fully come to Jesus until probably like last year, right? Because you're not fully with Jesus until you repent, right? Doesn't matter what you say, doesn't matter how much you ask for him or how much you try to do in his name or how much you claim you want him. Until you repent, you don't really have a full relationship with him. So I didn't live in a state of repentance fully and more committedly until about a year ago. Well, almost a year ago from now. Almost a year from now. And so I just wanted to talk about that story. So that's how I kind of came to a lot of these ideas. And I'm going to talk about the nature of prayer in this chapter and what I learned about prayer and how prayer works, the power of prayer, what sort of gives it almost like power, and how God responds to prayers and how to use those responses. Once you understand the nature of those responses, you can now use that to speak to God and have a back and forth conversation with God, which never ends, right? So it's an amazing experience. It's a wonderful experience. Everyone should do it. I would implore everyone to do it. I would say that you really don't want to not do that, right? It'll be terrible for you not to do that. So it's not like a kind of interesting option that, I kind of might do that. I don't know if I should. You know what I mean? No, every single person on the planet should do that. But the next video we're going to talk about, I think I talk about free will. Because you have to understand the importance of free will when it comes to a relationship with God and prayer. Yeah, I don't think this chapter will be too theory heavy like the last chapter was. Because we're really going to, subconscious energy will play a part of it, but it's not like a huge part of what we're going to be talking about. So this chapter might be a little bit easier to understand. But next chapter we're going to talk about the role free will plays in prayer and the importance of it. Alright, so that's it though. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.